Has received several awards for her work, including the Society of Professional Journalists 2017 Young Journalist of the Year Award, the 2017 Detroit Young Professional Vanguard Award, and the 2014 Rookie Writer Award from Michigan Press Association. She was also named a 2018 Rising Star by News Media Alliance and was a 2016 Fellow of the Loyola School of Law at Los Angeles Journalist Law School. She is the Vice President of the Board of Directors for the SPJ Detroit chapter and a board member overseeing Eastern Michigan University student newspaper Eastern Echo, or Eagles. Stafford has also made several television appearances and hosted and moderated several events, and we were lucky and blessed enough to get her to moderate our panel today. Ladies and gentlemen, Kat Stafford.
Thanks for coming out and joining us for what's sure to be a lively discussion. Before we get started, I wanted to allow our panel to introduce themselves. As you can see, we have a great panel here today. So, guys, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Lilia Fernandez. I'm from the Law Center at Michigan State University here in the Department of Media and Information. Our research looks at policy and regulation information for technology. Some of our recent work that's related to our discussion today has to do with search and political opinion and what makes people especially vulnerable to information problems such as fake news, information bubbles, echo chambers, and filter bubbles. I also teach some courses in the society, which is
my name is Jeff Hamill, Professor Emeritus. That's the first time I've had to use that title. Thank you. I was at Eastern Michigan for 31 years. I began my career getting a degree in journalism from Bowling Green, worked in newspapers, worked in radio news, did some work in cable news, and then have been teaching about media production, writing, and the like, and mostly recently critical evaluation focused on the study of media literacy, which is my definition, disarming the messenger, empowering the consumer. And a lot of it ties into exactly what we're here to talk about, fake news, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Angie Early, and I am a librarian at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Happy to be here today, and thank you for the invitation. I do various things at the library, including teaching a 7-week course that I co-developed with Haley Mooney and Siobhan Desai. Haley is here today to help me answer questions if I don't get there, if I don't have the answers for that. It's a 7-week course. I've taught it for about a year and a half now. Taught it 3 different times, and it is open to all undergraduates at the University of Michigan. It's been a really interesting and informative experience, and I've also presented on the class and working in that way. So.
Hi, I'm Sandra Swoboda. I'm currently the program director for Great Lakes Now, which is an initiative at Detroit Public Television looking at the Great Lakes, the science, the research, the policy, the culture, the recreation. This gentleman in the Great Lakes sweatshirt here in the front is not modeling for us, but I do like the sweatshirt that has the Great Lakes on it. I appreciate that. In my previous life, which just ended in October, I worked at WDET where I was the special assignments manager. WDET is part of Wayne State University, and so while I was attending there, I also went to graduate school and got a master's in library and information science. Completed that in August of 2017. So a lot of pieces are coming together that got me here today. One is my background as a print journalist. I have a degree in journalism and history. I've worked mainly in print journalism in Southeast Michigan, Northwest Ohio for my whole career. And then got into the public radio side of things where there's much more audience engagement and community engagement than in commercial media. And that's a whole other panel on positives and negatives about that, but mostly positive. But as part of putting all of that together, we did in 2018 a series of events at WDET with support from the Knight Foundation, and we called it Gimme Some Truth. And we had the best speakers in the metro area. And just how we met. And we partnered with community libraries, and I think we did 7 in various forms. We had speakers from community groups in whatever area we were in, talking about the importance of information in that community, how you could get information in that community, and then we would have journalists and librarians, and I mean, we even had police officers there, people that ran local Facebook groups, talking about how information now in the media and what's produced online, mainly on social media, is kind of intersecting in communities, and how can people sort through everything that we're seeing these days. So it was a really, really engaging and rewarding series of events. We're looking at how to maybe replicate that, and my half joke, because it's really not a joke anymore, is blending my work now with Great Lakes, fake news of the Great Lakes, and something along those lines. So as we say in the business, stay tuned. So thanks so much for having me today, and looking forward to this.
So before we get started talking about fake news, I kind of wanted to discuss a little bit what is the state of the news industry right now. As you know, even at the Free Press, just this week we had a series of voluntary layoffs and some staff reductions, and we'll also be seeing that at the news, and it's happening across the country. So my first question to the panel is, what do you believe is the role of the media? Has that at all shifted over the years, especially with the crowd of social media that we've seen come up recently? So what's the role now? Has it changed?
Let me start that a little bit. The role of the journalist has always been to inform. Now, who is served by the information, I think, is what has changed over the years. Newspapers at one time, radio and television, were all about creating or helping to create an informed populace. It's a social responsibility theory of the press that says that the media should exist to serve society. I think that's what's changed. Our media have always been commercial. There's never been a doubt about that. But today it seems to be, to my old eyes, a matter of existing to exist to make profit as opposed to existing to exist to inform. And I think that is, in my mind, in my observation, the largest shift. Not that the commercial media now are so dominant, but that they do not even pretend largely to serve the needs of the populace the way at one time they were supposed to have been doing so under a social responsibility concept. Today is purely commercial. That's my small, short rant to get you off.
So if I could follow that just a little bit, I think, so Kat, I'm going to push back on you and the role of media. Do you mean news media? Do you mean social media? Do you mean commercial media? Entertainment? Public media? And, you know, I mean, I can go on, but, or what all of us as individuals can produce on our social media feeds, on our free WordPress sites that we can search engine optimize, and more people can pick those up and share them on Facebook just as they would any item, an item on a blog versus something in the free press or public TV or public radio or other kind of respected institutions. And I think what's really changed is the almost responsibility of us as consumers of information. Not everybody knows the difference between all those organizations. I mean, I work in the business and there's blends and all of those, so how are like normal people supposed to know whether their reliable friend is sharing something that comes from even academia in a research publication that a university news agency has pointed out? So when you talk about so much the role of the media that's changed, it's always in the context of what media are these days. And to me, one of the biggest overall challenges is informing people, audiences, communities about all of those differences, and we should have different expectations about what there are. It's not the same. The Free Press is not publishing the same thing online as any of us with a blog or any kind of advocacy organization, but sometimes it all looks the same as we see it as consumers.
You guys want to jump in?
If you have something, go ahead. I do have something.
Okay.
So I want to push a little bit to, in terms of your question, which is the role of the media. You got the right
Pick on the moderator day.
I do a lot of these different kinds of talks. I've been to the Detroit Press Club and public libraries, as Sandra mentions. I have journalists come to my class, and they often give that answer in terms of the role of the media is to inform the public, in terms of the public good. And my students always push back on that. They say, you know, you're not doing a good enough job in terms of those things. And I often hear reporters also saying, we are doing the best job. I mean, we are doing, when they compare it to maybe a WordPress or something that, although I do think there's some great sort of on the ground grassroots things happening in terms of looking at the Flint water crisis and some of the other things that, that have happened. When I think of the role of the media, it's not maybe just to inform the public, it's also that they have a public relations problem right now, where people are not trusting traditional media. And so as much as the goal is to inform the public for the public good, if that is so, they're going to have to fix their public relations problem, and it can't just be the consumer that does that. You know, we've just had some things over the weekend in terms of reporting. People were starting to trust BuzzFeed more, and then there's the Michael Cohen stuff that's happening, and some of these other things. And when I bring this up, this PR problem, it often makes reporters, some of the journalists in my class, really upset. And it's not because I don't think journalists are doing a good job overall, but because of the competing things that you're talking about, because of some of these well-known things that have come out in more of a grassroots kind of way, and because of some of the BuzzFeed things, and because of sort of this eradication of trust in common public institutions, whether it's the news media, the church, the government, all of these sort of things that we used to be able, but as a culture, maybe not so much with the non-dominant culture, but it sort of overall, people have trusted that. There is a PR problem that I think the role of the media needs to acknowledge and then sort of address as well.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of piggyback off Angie's thoughts here about the eradication of trust having a lot to do with all of this. But I have to give my own bias here. I have
A little louder, please.
Oh, all right. So let me express my own bias. I have a background in journalism as well, and so I do now will always see the role of journalists as extremely important, not just for informing the public, but for motivating. And at this point in time, it seems to me that we need to follow all these other trends that we're seeing digitally and just get very niche. There needs to be a broader investment in local journalists. There needs to be more mentoring, one-on-one training, and a continued diligence. It seems that there is a lot of time and effort and resources that are being put into journalists trying to defend themselves right now, or based on this discrediting campaign that's going on. So reinvestment in the local and reinvigorating these connections, particularly with young people, and holding these standards up in terms of what is accurate, good information, are all on the forefront of this battle that the media are facing.
And so some of you mentioned the trust component, which I think is really interesting, especially thinking about locally in terms of Detroit. You know, one of the things I often hear as a reporter in the city is, well, I have an issue trusting the free press, or I have an issue trusting other news sources because I don't see people that look like me covering the news. So, in your opinion, how big of, how should news organizations handle this issue in terms of newsroom diversity? And do you think that's a huge part of what's contributing to some of the trust that you're seeing, specifically thinking of a community like Detroit or Flint?
Hugely. Yeah, I mean, I started at public radio in 2014 to cover the bankruptcy, and it was no secret of what the courtroom looked like, and even what the media corps looked like. And so, maybe that's fine in a courthouse, and you're just covering the daily proceedings. But when you're really looking to tell the full range of the story about the city, the effect on people and residents across a wide variety of incomes, from some of the lowest income residents and pensioners to multi-million-dollar attorneys, you really need, no one reporter can do that themselves. No one media institution can do that, but certainly not one reporter, and not a team of reporters with very similar experiences either. There's a lot of research into who journalists are, and they are generally well-educated, generally white, generally from middle income, upper income backgrounds. Actually often male, but anecdotally in my career I would say, like when I worked at the newspaper in Toledo, we were maybe a little bit more male, but our newsrooms in the last couple of years have been a lot female. But you're right, as you sort of climb up, same thing, same as any business organization, male leadership, concentrated in the more prestigious beats, as people would say. So I think, to get back to your question on the solutions, I think number one is mentoring and internship programs, drawing from a wide range of schools. We're starting to explore doing some things with high schools. We are in this community, we want people working for us from the community. We need people to help tell the stories of the community who are here, being very conscious in hiring and promotion of who people are and that they contribute. And it's not just, it's rethinking what the qualifications are. It's not just that I can, type 90 words a minute and turn out a story on deadline. What are my connections and understanding of the community, and how does that weigh in the formula of who is being hired and promoted within the newsrooms? So those are a couple things I've seen going on, or hope to do more of.
Sure, I would agree, and I'd say that this isn't just the responsibility of the newsroom either. This is everybody's responsibility. We need greater investments in program and access and opportunity. And going back to the diversification, opinion leaders are going to reflect people's experience, and journalists at the local level should be these opinion leaders. But we need to get the people in the pipeline and offer them these opportunities, offer them the resources, offer them the investments and training, and the opportunity, the education and options much earlier than what seems to exist.
And if I could just start, I forgot one thing. I think we tend to talk about who's reporting in terms of age and race and economic background, but it's no secret that most of the newsrooms I've worked in have skewed highly liberal in politics, and getting more so these days. Again, anecdotal, but if we are really looking to build trust across communities and audiences, and have new audiences and grow and take seriously our role to inform a broader public, we need to be thinking about reaching out kind of across politically as well, and seeing journalism majors coming from, or at least not so much embracing, but including more of that perspective.
I will say too, in the class that I teach, we look at the Pew research in this area to get to some of the sort of research-based sort of information around who is in the newsrooms, and some of my students are very surprised at the lack of diversity in that research, and some are. I let the students choose among various Pew research reports, and someone almost always picks that one because they are passionate about showing people of maybe not people from the dominant culture to say, look, this is real, this is happening, and that this is something that needs to be fixed. And so, there is evidence to back up the fact that not just locally, but sort of on a national scale, there's a lack of diversity, which I think translates in these lacks of perspective and some of the other things in terms of bringing things to light. When folks don't have those connections to be able to tell those stories, to report those stories is a better way of saying that. And so it's real, it is, and it could very easily be contributing to the lack of trust with that. There is something about that connection, the Walter Cronkite old connection that we have and what we need to see in 2019 and beyond.
And I remember one of those, so it's Pew Research Center. They're all online, you can look them up. They do really great information graphics. They do a lot of things in education and technology as well. But I remember two of the sort of diversity measures, which will tell you a lot about newsrooms, is very few veterans and very few gun owners. So if you think about how that shapes and colors how you cover, think about even stories you want to do or issues you want to cover. If you're leaving out that direct perspective, that makes a big difference. And again, positive, negative on gun ownership, people own them. But if you have a newsroom full of people where no one does, it very much changes the conversation and how things are perceived.
Jeff, did you want to add?
Unfortunately, these questions are all very complex, and finding a relatively easy answer is not going to be possible. My response would be that reporters, journalists, people who are driven to inform the public should have a passion for doing, Spike, the right thing. By the audience, by the people. There has to be a passion for doing well, for seeing society and culture evolve. And I don't, through the students that I had in my last 20 years, and I'm not pointing my fingers at students, but there seems to be that lack of passion for really informing, for being a positive influence in their society. More often than not, I taught in electronic media, I taught electronic media, and when students would come in to my announcing class, for instance, or one of my production classes, what do you want to do with this? What do you want to, I want to be at news. What does that mean? And inevitably what it meant is I want to have my face on news, and I want to be a celebrity. I want to talk to people. I want to be Carmen Harlan. Good Lord, I wish we had more Carmen Harlans, but we don't. But that's their goal. And I think what's happened is that, not that my generation or generations before mine were more passionate or better people, but we had more of a sense, there was more of a sense of serving than taking. And when I think about the response to that question, I think it has to come back to a cultural acceptance of our role, our responsibility to each other. I don't see that a lot. In my classroom, I saw it rarely. And I think this is something that it's not going to turn around very quickly. It's a cultural shift that has occurred. And at the back end of it is we get a lot of people moving into the media who are there for the wrong reasons. They're there for self-aggrandizement as opposed to serving the population that they serve. And you cannot instill that kind of goal or orientation into a student. It has to come from somewhere. And I think if we track everything back, trace back, it comes down to family. And it comes down to what responsibility is in an individual family, and so on and so forth. Very quickly, just to wrap up, I got into news because every day I saw my mom and dad reading newspapers and talking about stuff. And I became interested in being one of those people who helped other people make decisions. Not just the way I want it to be done or you want it to be done, but here's the information here. Now, do something with that, inform people. I don't see that anymore. I see a lot of selfishness, and I see a lot of self-serving motive. I'm waiting to see that mass who are willing to work with people for people. I don't see it.
So I think that's an interesting segue into what we're here to talk about, which is the idea of fake news. I was just telling someone on the panel that I actually kind of push back on that, because if it's fake, is it really news? So how would you define fake news in your mind? What is fake news?
Do you want the president's definition? Because we all know what that is. Fake news is anything he disagrees with, or disagrees with him. And I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. Is that really fake news? No. It may not make me happy, but it's still the case. Fake news is the National Enquirer, which our president cites as one of his sources for that is fake news, where you make stuff up. However, fake news, it's not fake news if my take on it, my reporting of it, disagrees with what you want to hear. There's a term that has gotten a lot of credence recently, and I've been using it for 40 years. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. And I'm sure that most of you out here know what that means. It means selective exposure. Expose yourself to stuff that you agree with. Selective perception of the stuff that you do encounter, which means I'm going to perceive it through my own filter. And then selective retention, I retain that which serves me. You'll notice throughout the whole thing, it's me. What serves me? By that definition, fake news is anything that doesn't serve me. That's cognitive dissonance, folks. Mic drop.
When we're looking at fake news, we're generally looking at news stories that have no factual basis, but they're presented as fact. And right now, that tends to be largely for financial gains. But of course, the conversation around fake news is a lot more nuanced than that. So it's important to make some distinctions. So we look at misinformation, which is just inaccurate, misleading information, despite or regardless of the intentions. And then there's disinformation, which is intentionally falsified information that's put out for whatever reason. So there's plenty of instances in which misinformation is unknowingly spread from one person to another, particularly through social network platforms, but the disinformation has the characteristic that the producer knows that this is incorrect information and is putting it out there for financial gain or to serve a particular agenda. But what fake news is not human error. And human error that is very much a part of journalism as it is in any other industry. And this conversation has become so twisted and contorted in such a way that any human error made by journalists, and the standards of the profession obviously mandate that people go back and correct those errors, but they are going to exist. And since there's this assault on the media right now, there's, again, so much time, energy, and conversation around these errors, and we've just pulled that so far away from what fake news actually is. So again, by creating the conceptualization that the news that's presented with no factual bias, this is much different than anything that doesn't serve my interest or anything that that is questioning a particular agenda, idea, or position, or radical statement, and so on and so forth.
Your point about this sort of nuance of that is important to make. And so I think what that says is, let's look at it from maybe a different angle. So when I talk to students in the class, they're not as interested in what is fake news as what is news, and having those conversations about, they're there to get past that and to try to figure out, how am I going to learn what's going on really in the world today? And so we have conversations around that, and the word fake news is really just, I don't know if you would call it an advertising slogan or something to get them through the door in terms of having those conversations, because these students, I don't know, I wanna let you know, they care passionately. The students that I talk to in these things are not motivated by a me thing. They care passionately about this. When I talk to the journalists that I invite into the classroom, yes, they are very discouraged by some of the segments of the media that have, I don't know if you want to call it like the polarization of the media in terms of revenue and things like that, the sort of polarization of cable news and how that has affected sort of the revenue generation purpose of a news agency. But these journalists actually are looking at this as an opportunity, that this has come to light, and that they actually are seeing young people who are getting into their classes because they want to address some of these things. As Professor Hamill says, this is a nuanced conversation, and so I try to turn the conversation into, how am I going to really know what's going on in the world today, and what are the questions that I'm going to ask in order to figure that out, and how do I have conversations with other people in terms of these issues when we're all coming with a different set of backgrounds, a different set of experiences, and hearing different things. So some of the things in terms of some of the categories that we heard earlier, I want to also point out satire is an important category. News is entertainment. I want to also point out, how social media has affected that in terms of the place where we see news and how that informs with it side by side with grandma's update on, the garden kind of thing, and how that affects our engagement with the news. And so there's multiple sort of pieces of this where, it informs all of those different things. And so, like I said, I try to turn it into more like, okay, well, I'm going to be out there in the world with people who disagree with me, so how am I going to know how to talk about this stuff?
Go ahead.
Kat, do you mind if I ask you your perspective on this question?
Sure, what do I think about fake
What is fake news?
Yeah,
fake news? Turning it back on me, okay. Expected that.
We're being really mean to the moderator.
Well, for me, being a journalist, being at the Free Press, it's been an interesting journey. I've been at the Free Press for about 5 years now, and I would say within the last year and a half is when we've really gotten hit with this idea of fake news. Yesterday I got a really nasty email from a reader who was accusing me of all sorts of things, but the subject line is fake reporter, fake news, Free Press. So for me, what is fake news? Like I said, I kind of push back on that because, when you see these sites, you can always identify them by, news.net or just a ridiculous, website. That to me, that's fake news. The news that you see being created by these credible sources like the Free Press, like the news, like WDET and all these different forms and facets, that's not fake news. But for me as a journalist, it's how do we help the public determine what fake news is? How do we help our readers determine how to separate what we're reporting versus something you might see on, some random website? That's the challenge that we're seeing, because we get a lot of emails from people who kind of conflate us with, a random website that they see online. So how do you transition a conversation to that point where we're, as reporters, helping people determine what's real and what's fake? So what we kind of started to do at the Free Press, we had a big investigative project that published a week or so ago about the Gilbert kind of getting away from some citations he was supposed to receive for some properties. And what we we did in that piece was we kind of made note, this is how the story was brought together, this is how we reported it, these are the documents that we have. So now as we report, we're trying to bring readers into the process so you can see how long it takes for us to cultivate these stories and what types of sources that we're using. So I think that's kind of interesting that you're starting to see a lot more publications locally and nationally do that as well.
That's my thing about the PR problem right there. Because WordPress blog doesn't tell you that. You know, they don't know, you don't know where. I'm a librarian, I like to see the citation, right? Like this is, you're telling me about the process that helps me, if I'm open to reading that. It helps me, you know, see that. I want to also add to what you said in terms of, let's be generous a little bit more with our reporters in terms of understanding the pressures that getting a news report out quickly in the age of instant gratification has. I mean, the news is in front of us a lot, and I hear, as much as the passion for due diligence is there, I do think it's there, but the pressure to get things out quickly, to be the first, those things are tremendous pressures in terms of the survival of traditional media too.
And so that kind of takes me to the next question of how has social media impacted journalism? You know, for me, I can say it's added, like she just said, you know, a ton of pressure. You know, before we were just expected to go out in the field, report a story, come back and write it. If you're done, you turn it over to the editor, it comes back to you, that's it. Now you're out, you know, I might be at a press conference with Mayor Mike Duggan and I'm expected to tweet, I'm expected to take pictures, shoot video, all on top of, you know, fact checking what he's saying and then reporting it out. So that's a lot of work. So how would you say social media has impacted journalism? Has it been helpful, harmful, or both?
Both. No. Yeah, both. I mean, I think in terms of understanding your audience, having a conversation with your audience, being able to, hey, we're working on a story about people who attended a cool Martin Luther King Day event. Can anybody email cat@fruit.com? You know, and then all of you could see that and tell the story about being here today. And that's a little bit of a flip example, but when you're trying to report on, you're trying to put a human face to a research study, how do you find that person to tell the story? And social media is a wonderful tool, a tool, not the only one, that helps make those connections. Social media helps give perspectives that you may not have considered. You know, if you follow a thread for a feed, pick your hashtag on a controversial event in the news. There were like 3 over the weekend. So if you just follow that hashtag, you do get some unique perspectives. You may agree with them or not, but at least you're getting more perspectives, which at heart is what news reporting is, informing about opinions and ideas and perspectives and experiences that are out there. At the same time, it's very easy in the age of where we're driven by, we want audience to see it, which means we want people to click on our piece, which means if they see the headline, even on our native web pages, not even just social media, now we have to think about the clickbait phenomenon and how that's happening. I mean, we've all probably clicked on something that we thought looked like an interesting headline. We got to the story and it was something completely different or wasn't a reputable organization. So social media has done, I think, good. I mean, I could talk about this for an hour, which I'm not going to, but it's done some good in terms of connections with people and being able to have your story, whatever outlet you're at, through the sharing process, through the conversation that happens online, conversation, in quotes, different dynamic than if we do it face-to-face. So it's really allowed our work to have a bigger reach and impact and inform more people. But it has also changed, I think, in a lot of negative ways, how people view journalists, how stories are oversimplified or misrepresented, and you don't always have the ability, if an audience member calls me up, we can talk about it. If they're just criticizing work that I've done on social media, I may not even see it or have a place to correct what had happened. So I stand by my original vote.
Yeah, I think it's certainly an extremely beneficial tool in terms of engagement and reaching people where they're at. And we've got this, with any new emerging technology, it's not clear, it's disruptive in nature, and it's been disruptive to the industry in a lot of ways. I think one of the most prominent ways is that it really blurs the conceptualization of an information source. So it's, particularly when we're being inundated with so much information, it's a lot easier to just fall back on our pre-existing beliefs or turn to, something a friend said, rather than taking the leap to try to read an entire news article or try to assess the validity of that news. I think another important negative component here is that social media has really facilitated and nurtured the fringe. So it has brought into the conversation and made visible a lot of attitudes, opinions, and erroneous facts that would otherwise have been silenced or stayed in their silos. But there are these information sharing networks that allow these fringe ideas to get out there. And I know I've heard stories of journalists who have been systematically attacked through these processes, and this would not have been possible in the past without these information sharing networks, without this visibility of and then it brings all these things into the conversation that frankly just don't belong there. So
You don't think that's a good thing?
no,
Good. I was afraid you were going to cite that as one of the positives.
No, absolutely not. Social media is great, it's a litmus test if you want to go out and assess what your community or your constituents feel about something, but even if it's kind of in opposition, but this is much different than these fringe ideas that are becoming front and center and looking as if they've got this gigantic following, when the reality is, in a lot of cases, it's a very, very small, organized, knowledge-sharing network of people that are systematically attacking those that are attempting to have this broader conversation, public discourse.
I want to add to that, and it's something that Haley and I were talking about on the way over here. So I want to do the con, and then I'll do the pro, which is sort of in the piece of that. And it's something that has been dubbed surveillance capitalism, okay? This idea that engaging with social media throws open the door to some of what you had thought was more private information, which is then manipulated in a way that allows for the targeting of the audience in certain ways, so that the ad that I get in social media is different in terms of the 2016 election, is very different than the ad that perhaps Sandra gets in that. So social media, because of how fast it grew, because of it's not like was built. It's a private enterprise. These companies are owned privately. In terms of, they're public they're on the stock exchange. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the energy. It's not a utility that's putting forward that stuff. But in any case, in opening the door to sort of these companies knowing more about you, you're more easily manipulated into thinking a certain way. The pro, I'm not sure how much publicity the Me Too movement would have had without social media. The Arab Spring, that sort of grassroots, distinguishing between the grassroots and the fringe in terms of those things where it might start like more of a fringe movement, and it becomes more widely aware, people become more widely aware of these issues. It does come down to critical thinking, which is, some of the things that, of course, I work with in more educational settings. So trying to find your way through the social media morass, trying to figure out the pros and cons is a sophisticated, nuanced conversation, and does require more effort than just blankly reading your Snapchat.
I have slides that I have in a deck about this topic, and we talk about Facebook, and I have graphs of use of different social media platforms. But I put up Facebook and I say, well, what is it? I mean, when I read it, some of it's like my friend circle, right? I could text all these people and say, what's up today? Or I could go on and see what they did this weekend, or where, they're walking their dogs, or, oh, that picture of your food is great. Can I have that recipe? I mean, we do that in other parts of our lives, so it really has that social network component. But it also has a news component, right? Our organizations put our articles, our pieces, our videos, our shows, we promote on social media. It has a lot of the function of news media. It's also a game platform. I play Scrabble, maybe somebody plays Words with Friends. There's other games on there that you play with people in the way you would do that in other parts of your life. It's a technology company. Let's be fair about that. It's also an advertising platform for a lot of businesses to advertise and sell their products and raise awareness. It's an advocacy platform for Me Too. Use that example. It's also data collection of all of us, which is at heart why it exists now. So in reading and using social media, because of that very last use of it alone as a data collection company, that makes it very different than the free press, than public television, and how we as users, audience, community are engaged and have a relationship with it. So we don't have an answer in any similar historical way for what Facebook and Twitter are, and even YouTube now, compared to any other sort of media or technology or community platform, which is what makes it both horrible and really, really interesting.
Social media, I think it's the death knell for all of us. No, I'm overstating it, but not by much. We exist in a time when we have access to more information than anybody has ever had access to in history. And yet, in many respects, we are some of the most uninformed people in the world, because we frequently want to stay in our silo and hear what those who agree with us are saying, thereby reinforcing what we feel. Now, is that bad? In the long term, I think so. In the short term, no. It does help us to join with those who are like-minded. The problem is, it tends to make the people who are not like-minded other, and therefore problematic. Now, some of us can be very calm about the other. Others will get irate about the others. It's an independent thing. It depends on how we individually feel. I think that social media has had an effect of resegregation. I did a presentation several years ago at the Popular Culture Association conference wherein I suggested that the media are resegregating society. And not to go on long about this, but growing up, when I listened to the radio, I heard everybody from Frank Sinatra to Ella Fitzgerald to the Beatles to the Rolling Stones to Hank Williams. It was all there on top 40. Okay, good or bad, who knows? It doesn't really matter. But today, it's possible for an individual to go through their entire life and listen to one kind of music, hear one kind of opinion. And then when the person who has grown up listening to jazz all their lives are exposed to something else, country, I hate that stuff. You've never heard it. You've never listened to it. I think, in my mind, that one of the things that social media has done is it has made us less tolerant of others and extremes. As far as information is concerned, certainly we can get a lot of information, but since much of what we're getting or exposed to on our social media accounts is fake, perhaps, questionable, disinformation, misinformation, we're not informed. We think we are, but we're not. Who do we rely on? I will go back to a professional journalist. Now, Do they have their own bias? Of course they do. But at least professionals, there's a filter here. There's a gatekeeper, if you will, which is a gatekeeper, that's a different matter. But a gatekeeper will keep you on track. Social media, there are no gatekeepers, there are no filters. Put out there what you want. And it is an illusion to say that all opinions are equal. It's not. An uninformed opinion is harmful. Informed opinions, terrific. I'll learn from them. Uninformed opinions, which is what a lot of social media is harmful.
So let's kind of transition into talking about the political environment and the president and what type of impact that's had on journalism. I don't think we've ever had before a president that referred to journalists as the enemy of the people. And I also can't remember a time where, I'm used to getting criticism from readers. In fact, we welcome constructive criticism, but just last week I had received a voicemail that was so terrible that it involved me and a local congresswoman that we actually had to forward it on to Capitol Police. So I wanted to know from you, what type of impact do you think the president, with the various tweets that he sends out or just the things that he says about the press, what type of impact has that had on journalism and how we are viewed by the public?
In the newsroom, it makes it a bigger challenge to be what we would like to think as less biased reporting. How do you show various sides of an issue? How do you show another side to being called an enemy of the people? I mean, we're all human. How are we going to sort of parse out that perspective on a talk show, say? I mean, leaving politics aside, some of the behavior and methods and name-calling and maturity level are something that I don't think we know how to deal with from the President of the United States. So there's been a fair bit of confusion. I'll leave it at that. At the same time, there are a lot of people, a lessening number, but people in our audiences who support him, who support his policies. So, talk about the complication of things. How do you present on a public radio talk program a variety of perspectives about policy versus person? And it gets kind of back to what Professor Hamel said about the cult of personality, the idea that we as individuals can all be superstars, that we could have a YouTube channel where we have 10 million followers, separating out the person from the office, the communication style and the sound bites from the actual policies and impact is something that has gotten extremely difficult on a personal level like none of us have ever seen, I don't think.
I do think too, when we look back from where the current president has come from, I mean, he comes from the media. He made good TV. He had a, well, that's not what I meant, but a lot, like he goes on and about his ratings, about The Apprentice, right? That's what I'm talking about. Please don't misunderstand me. There's no judgment about that show. In any case, he comes from that background, and early in his campaign, he may have been covered more by the media because of the news media, because of those reasons, right? Maybe they thought he made good TV, right? And so there's this sort of symbiosis that happened that now people are like, oh, we made him. We didn't ask the challenging questions. The news media maybe didn't ask the challenging questions coming up. And so people are frustrated by that as well. But I don't think we can deny that The Apprentice had very high ratings and that there was this idea of having an executive.
Excuse me, but I will argue that point.
Okay.
Its ratings were never sky high.
Okay.
It was never a top 20 show.
Okay.
But that's beside the point. It did have an audience, and he learned how to.
That's my point, yeah. And also, there are segments of the population that was a very high show, and maybe we see that showing up in other parts of his supporters even now in terms of thinking of what an executive is supposed to be like, you know, telling people that they're fired and having this idea of what that looks like. But I will say, I will own that where I grew up, that was everybody I talked to watched that show. And so I can see how that would show up in other ways.
They should watch public television. Can I give you some
Exactly.
information? It did not air on
Where I grew up, there was no public television.
So, to me, this rhetoric has a very, very obvious reason behind it, and it's simply to undermine the credibility of the press and undermine the credibility of institutions in general. And then we've got this person who is standing strong against, you know, the evil press and whatever else. So we've got the first outcome is obviously a greater polarization, right? So we don't have people that see through this, and they feel very strongly about that. And people that see through this also see that the normalization, and unfortunately the press coverage of all of these attacks on the media just perpetuate this further. So we've got this deepened polarization and the tribalism and all that sort of thing, but we've also got in the middle people that are just becoming confused, and this distrust can lead to diminished political participation, and this distrust can lead to a number of other people feel ambivalent about their own opinions. They don't know, you know, who to trust, and so on and so forth. So in some ways, it's a terrible, horrible thing, obviously, and this normalization is really pushing us into this uncharted territory in which, you know, if the press can't be trusted, then who do we trust? Well, Trump or whomever else. And then decreased political engagement about those who may become confused about this conversation. And then some of the instances that Kat has shared with us today, this blatant attack even on local personal or individuals that are, you know, have the audacity to go out there and actually report what's happening and have a political conversation. Again, this goes getting back to the unfortunate, you know, things like 8chan and Reddit and these very organized attempts to pull down individuals within the press who have the audacity to try to bring this political debate back into the public sphere where it belongs.
Historically, new media have always been viewed with distrust, and there's always been time that is necessary for culture and society to adjust to new media. I was fond of telling the students that people don't change. The media, the technologies change, and those technologies change people as a result, our behavior and so on and so forth. One of my favorite stories was along these lines was back in the mid-19th century, shortly after the invention of the telegraph. There was a wide body of individuals who believed that the telegraph was going to have negative effects, deleterious effects on society, simply because of the speed at which information was translated. It's very, if you think about today, it's very funny. But you know, they were worried that information would be too much, too quick, and it was going to have a deleterious effect on society, on the nervous conditions of human beings. Well, clearly we worked our way through that. But that argument that was made then, and which has popped up, came up during when Gutenberg made movable type feasible. There were those who resisted that because it would democratize learning. You know, we can't have the rabble learning like the nobles and the clergy do. Well, we move through that. Then we move into the telegraph, and on and on and on. And I could cite every new technology coming along, and there have been arguments about its effectiveness, whether it's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing. The one certainty is societies have adjusted to it. For better or worse, societies have adjusted. I grew up in the 1950s. Television was it for me. I loved television. I can still hear my aunts and uncles saying, "You're gonna ruin your eyes watching all that damn television. You're gonna do this watching all, television is not good, it's sappy." And then in the 1960s, we had Newton Minow, the FCC, claiming that it's a vast wasteland. All media have been attacked, no question about it. We have to adjust to it. It seems that social media today has opened a new Pandora's box that for some reason, maybe it's just my age, seems to be more frightening because it seems to empower people more than previous technologies did. Now people feel that, oh, now I've got power. Now people have to listen to me. Are you familiar with a group called incels? They're men. They call themselves incels. Is that?
Involuntarily celibate.
Involuntary celibates, exactly. These are men who women don't want to have anything to do with, so they have taken, there are, and what where I'm coming back to with this idea is because of the new media now, these people have a platform, and not their ideas are no longer necessarily crackpot. Now they're mainstream. And I think that's what the media is doing with Donald Trump, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are normalizing the abnormal. And by covering every little tweet, everything he says, and reacting to it, we're feeding the beast. And the media is feeding the beast. Ignore it.
And I would say that's happening because we talk about media evolving. Social media is evolving. When you see where young people are today, they are leaving Facebook. They are leaving Twitter. They are watching YouTube, which was kind of an older thing, and now they're coming back to. So it's evolving in that way too, which I think is really interesting. I don't know if you sort of see that even with the people if you're on social media as well. But this is something that is out there now. People are walking away from some of that stuff because of the particular platform that it's on. They'll invent something new, Snapchat, Instagram, make it more visual, which is even more visceral sometimes, and things like that too. But
TLDR.
too long.
At this point, I would like to see if anyone in the audience has any questions for our panel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, three aspects of fake news that really bug me, and I'd appreciate it, everybody that would comment about one or the other. The first big fake news is that the city of Detroit is on a comeback. When, if anything, it's a very asymmetrical development. Second thing is that the United States economy is strong. When it's built on a house of cards, debt, rotting infrastructure, declining wages, etc. And the third is that somehow we still live in a democratic republic when the truth is it's a kleptocracy morphing toward fascism.
So I'll bravely start this. Since 2014, I have gotten Google News alerts for Detroit bankruptcy. If that appears in whatever, I know it's Google News alerts, right? So it's their algorithm, but generally news media organizations, sometimes blogs or specialty publications or research will come up on there. Now, I have not put this in a spreadsheet, but I will tell you the comeback narrative is something much more outside Southeast Michigan. For the last 5 years, I have worked in a lot of collaboration with nonprofit media organizations in Southeast Michigan. I have a lot of friends in commercial media. That is not an overwhelming frame that we use much of the time. There may be indicators, there may be more new restaurants every weekend downtown, but that is not what we are all generally reporting about the full city of Detroit and the region by any stretch. So I think kind of let's say you mentioned the United States economy and also politics. So again, full panels we could do on any of those topics. But I think, you saw plenty on gerrymandering as one indication. We saw plenty done on that with the Voters Not Politicians initiative in the last Michigan election. I think you see national coverage of that. You see a lot on Donald Trump not winning the popular vote, only the Electoral College. I mean, I think there's big elements out there. Same thing with the economy, where journalists are bad. I mean, forget the politics side, like the business training and economics. If I ever find an intern who's an economics and journalism major, I'm taking that person right away. Because the business, because we report in cycles too. The news is whatever economic reports coming out, and those indicators don't always get beyond. So anyway, but yeah, the comeback one is like, don't call it comeback, like we never left. Like, never that teenage poets.
If I could jump in on that one, that's a sore spot for me as well, especially with the reporting I've been doing lately in terms of the city. I actually think that some of our local media has fed into that. I think, covering every single restaurant opening downtown, all of the, it seems like a lot of our coverage is segregated, which is an appropriate one, I think, to the 7.2, downtown area, as opposed to what's happening in the neighborhoods. So I do think that some of our media, that is the focus. I have also seen some media, especially with the Detroit Journalism Cooperative, trying to push to, get outside of that, to do more reporting in the neighborhoods. We see a lot of different local, publications popping up trying to do more of that work, but it seems like a lot of the stories that get attention are the new restaurants opening, are the press, the glitzy press conferences downtown. But I agree, there's a lot more reporting to be done in the neighborhoods. And to be frank, I think part of the problem is, when you have newsrooms that, again, don't reflect the community, you start to see stories that don't accurately reflect what's actually happening in the city. As someone that's from, the city airport area with parents who still live over there, I know what's happening over there. And it's not the same thing that you're seeing in Indian Village or these other neighborhoods that are coming back. So that's a great question, and I do think that the media could be doing a much better job of covering our community. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think that gets to something that Professor Fernandez was saying earlier, and that is the lack of local media overall. On all three of those issues, we've lost the little stories along the way that would prove the real story about the economy and about democracy all along the way. In all the little communities, we don't have reporters going to school board meetings, reporters going to road commission talks. We do not have that anymore in all, even in the smaller regions in Michigan, let alone statewide, or let alone national and internationally. The sort of how the media has sort of bought up itself into like just a few, big media conglomerates has taken away resources to allow the small town economic stories to happen. So then people are not reading that. The MLive stuff is much more writ large than some of these things. And so we lose that nuance. We allow these bigger media companies to tell the story without having all the facts.
The gatekeeper function, I think, becomes a very big issue here. And I will tie it back to the commercialization of all of our media. The fact of the matter is that the free press, the news, Channel 4, whatever, they're in the business of making money. They want to make a profit. And over the past, I'll jump in 30 years, the various media have watched their profits fall, largely. Well, what's the reaction of a businessman to this? What can I do to regain the audience? Well, one of the things I can do is preach to them what they want to hear. And I become a good news source. Now, I'm not saying that the Free Press does this or any other newspaper does this, but if I'm losing my audience, I'm going to try to get them back some way, shape, or form. And even if it's a nonprofit organization, you still take a look at those numbers to see what kind of eyeballs, how many eyeballs are on my show. It's all about attracting the audience. And so we will hear the Detroit because it will make the people in Detroit feel good, and maybe they'll continue to buy the newspaper or watch the station to increase their feel good about it. and so on and so forth. It seems to me that so much of what we're trying to discuss here comes back to economics. We may want to ignore that, but we do so at our peril because in the community I live in now, we lost a newspaper. The Ann Arbor News is no more. And it's a shame. I don't know basic stuff anymore. Oh, you can get it online. So I go to NLive and I have to wait through Grand Rapids and Bay City and Saginaw before I get to Ann Arbor, and so on and so forth. The media are serving themselves more than they serve us, generally. I think that's my response. Sorry.
A slightly different spin, but on the same idea here. Kathy asked earlier about some of the consequences of this political rhetoric and the attack on the media. You know, some argue it has created a cultural shift in which we're living in a post-truth era. And if we accept that to be true, what we need to recognize is that it isn't about the information that we're being told, but how we feel about the information that we're being told, or that we're being given. So in that, that's, you know, kind of dovetails with what Professor Hamill was saying, and I think it is very much an issue that we're faced with today. And then the other point is, kind of going back to the idea of the investment in the local journalists and the diversification of the newsrooms. These really need to be first and foremost. Not only should these newsrooms be more diverse and reflective of the communities that they're covering, but having an equal voice at the table to catch these omissions, fake news by omission, because that's, I think, the thread among those three examples that you gave us.
I got a question here. I noticed that our president loves to tweet. He's talking about how he visited the Martin Luther King Memorial just now. And this thing about information warfare and tweet, I kind of find that our government's going to like a seventh grade mentality. And can we get something to kind of either weaponize and to not retaliate, but stand up for right, you know, even like from local level to city level, you know, using these tweets tactically to bring positive change instead of spreading fake news.
I actually feel like this really started with the 2008 Obama campaign, where social media was used in very interesting ways for positive messaging around hope and change. We actually, in that side of the political spectrum, invented that. But we've lost that along the way. If we think about the whole political spectrum, there are, I don't want to turn it into just a red state, blue state, and us and them kind of thing, but people have learned from that campaign and morphed it into their own message and weaponized it, and we need to, maybe that side of the political spectrum needs to close that circle and try to figure out how to be better at the messaging that's happening out there in terms of in response to some of the negative campaigning.
I don't have a question, I have a comment, an observation and a comment. I was saying that he who creates the discourse has the power. And what I've seen in the media and also what I see up on the stage is the discourse is created by our president, or the whole concept of fake news. And we respond to it, and then when we respond to it, even when we give the other side or the contradiction to it, you're still giving it weight, you're still giving it the wings, and it travels, it gets bigger and bigger, because what's ultimately being remembered is what was said. What's never remembered is what the response to it was. And the case in point was the women's march, the first women's march. When the P word. And what they did in response was get the pink hats and call it, and the t-shirts saying we're pushing, okay? But the thing is that, we thought we won. But what was remembered was not all the great speakers. Women speakers who they're speaking. And I know women who came back from that right felt so empowered, but I said, what did the speakers say? They said, oh, they could deliver some powerful speeches. But what did they say? No one could tell me what they said. But people could talk about, and what the whole news media talked about was what Donald Trump said. And that went on and on and on and on. So he was empowered. And what I see that's happening with media, and especially with mainstream media, is the response to what he said, but not their own messages that they're putting out, their own stories they're telling, not in response to what he said. And he does that because he comes from media, he knows it. You put out the message, it doesn't matter whether it's negatively received or not. Because if it's negatively responded to, it's still giving it weight. It's still giving it weight, it's still giving it wings, and ultimately, in the end, what's remembered is his words. And that becomes the consciousness. And so that creates the confusion. Well, I heard this side of what he said, that side of what he said, and so I don't know which one is true, but the truth is neither. The truth is the message that really should be out there. It's your own stories, your own story. You don't have to respond every time you say something, but this happens over and over and over and over and over again. I'm a writer. I have a whole community of writers on Facebook, and I saw that. Even with them. All of a sudden, they start writing about what they were writing about. Everything was about what he said. And it grew. And he has the power. So that's my observation. I'm hearing that out there too.
Perhaps the biggest example of fake news is Donald Trump's tweets. I mean, when we respond, when the various media respond regularly, it's like Pavlov's dog. Oh, what did he tweet last night? Let's get on it, let's comment about it. Ignore it. Ignore it. Stop normalizing. And this falls on, not Trump, this falls on the media.
I was just going to say, this is one of the PR problems I was talking about in terms of the media, is that they're paying attention to that, and it is discrediting our trust in that. It's, in terms of people feeling like their voice is lost. They're going to walk away from that in terms of listening when they are doing their job in other ways. But fact-checking is one of the reasons that we want that. I'm going to let Sam talk about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you've started to see Donald Trump tweeted this, but according to 15 reports that are linked and statistics and previous news stories, or even here's what he said 2 years ago. And you're seeing NPR started doing this with State of the Union 2 years ago, live time fact checking. So watch for those. I don't know what public TV is going to do. I should probably figure that out. But NPR is doing, they have there's some really interesting information on how they put that together with a team of reporters from all the different beats. And as he would speak, they would literally live time it and annotate it, put the citations up for what other research was showing. So you're starting to see some of that, but that's on all of us as consumers. That's on us to push back when one of our friends.
Don't push back. I'm saying that the fact checking is the rebuttal. The rebuttal is never remembered. What's remembered is what you said. I'm saying put your own truth out there, just the truth, not in response to what he said. Your truth, period. The true story. Make that a whole different separate story, which is exactly what he does when we put our stories out there. When us, this side, puts the story out there, he turns around and he puts his own story that diverts the attention from that great story, whatever, to this story. Okay, but you do the same thing. Not the rebuttal. No one remembers the rebuttal. A year from now, no one will remember the rebuttal. A week from now, nobody remembers any rebuttal. I've seen so many great rebuttals, but he put it out there. That was the story that he put out. And what's remembered, ultimately remembered, is not the great in the consciousness and in the psyche.
We're gonna get another question over. Thank you for sharing
Can
your
I
thoughts.
just comment real quick? It's a really good point, and I think that one of the things that illustrates what you're saying here is there's some research at MIT, preliminary analysis, that suggested that in terms of fake news distribution, that fake news was more widely distributed by coverage of fake news by the media than the fake news being distributed itself. The other point I think that's very important and is actually extremely unfortunate is even with fact checking, we found again and again and again that when somebody is presented with a counterclaim, they're still going to remember the original claim rather than the counterclaim.
And because the original claim came first and then
That is
precedent.
possible.
Have to do the analytical work.
I'm a community organizer. I'm very passionate about the city of Detroit and us trying to show news at an equal level in all different communities. And I don't personally talk about Mr. Trump, our president. I want to talk about it in news locally. It may not be fake news that our local network, our channel 2, or in our traditional media like Detroit News and other major media outlet utilize. But I noticed that it seems to be unequal when it comes down to them reporting things about the city of Detroit. It may be the truth, but it's unequal, whereas they're not reporting things that goes on in the suburban areas of other big cities. So when I specifically talk about Mr. Trump, I want to talk about things locally, and it seemed like to me within the last 2 years things have changed, whereas I would always want to the news report, please be equal about reporting news, say positive things about Detroit. I wanted to uplift our perception. Nowadays, it's like I don't have to worry about it. They're doing it. They're doing it because it's like the branding has changed. They rebranded Detroit. And even though they're rebranding it, they're not utilizing the individuals who've been here the longest. They're branding it for other individuals. And I have a problem with that, whereas for years and years, I say about 7 years, I've been trying to say, well, won't you say some good things about us, won't you just be equal? One of my grassroots members stated that we could probably sue the city of Detroit or the news media because they would always have unequal news, and he was saying maybe that's what we need to work on suing them. Another thing with the news, I noticed many times I go to a community meeting, and they may pick me because of my hair color. I ain't be saying anything, but they be just that's why I say that sometimes they're into the ratings, in my opinion, okay? Because I say some profound things, and whereas they made, what you call it, they added the information that I said out of my mouth. You just saw my face up there. And what I had to tell the audience, my mouth was just moving, So it's they're enabled. They're trying to make sure that they have good ratings. And I don't know if they have criteria when they go out to do reports or whatever, and their bosses are telling them, okay, we need creative news. We don't need anyone saying things that that negative or positive about the city of Detroit. This is my opinion, So you all, and also in terms of diversity, I've gone to a couple programs, one down the street where the journalists, it was definitely a lot of diversity. They was talking about the rappers and what the rappers are producing nowadays, and it came down to the economic, the reason why they may want to produce songs that have a lot of cursing in it, profanity in it, because those are the songs that sell. But we had a lot of journalists. I know a lot of journalists. If you want to know about, you want diversity with any resources, you can come to Linda Bain and ask her on any type of area. If you need diversity in terms of religion, race, economic, just come to me and I'll let you know, okay?
Good.
One more. Okay.
I just have one question concern. One thing is one thing about Donald Trump is that he's consistent. If we all remember, when he started campaigning, he was on television every single day. And if we all know, consistency is something that if you say it out enough and enough time, people feel it's got to be true. And my concern is that along with the fake news is the subliminal messaging. I mean, if you read any article, how many advertisements pop up? So along with getting this fake news, you're also getting this subliminal message. You know, whether you want to or not, you're buying into something. Can you tell me how you turn that off? How do you turn it off? You can't.
So, I'm chuckling a little bit because, we've all Googled, well, a lot of us may have Googled something, and then all of a sudden the ad for that's popping up, right? And I had a friend, and this was actually a Facebook post, but she said, lesson, don't Google the kids' Christmas presents and then let them use your computer. And they knew what they were getting. But I have a friend who, and he's a lot more energetic about this than I am, but he actually uses like Internet Explorer as one kind of browser for Googling stuff, surfing the web, whatever, social media. And then he uses a whole second browser so that he kind of keeps things separate, which is scary that that's a thing now. But that's one way to at least, I don't know. I mean, you're never going to keep it totally pure and just, the sites, the media have to make money too, and ads have to be on there. We don't have them on public media, But we have messages, you can underwrite on our site. Some of it's just the economics of the business. If you're not subscribing to 12 newspapers, think of it as that price.
And I would say that's the kind of thing that I'm teaching in the class, is critical thinking and analytical thinking. Asking the questions, like why are they characterizing this political figure this way? What does that picture mean? Why did they choose an unflattering picture of blah, blah, blah? What do you see when, we can look at infographics and all kinds of subliminal messages that go through this when people use red font as opposed to other, all kinds, and these are the kinds of things, that we're talking about in the class. We're trying to develop critical thinking and analytical thinking and questions overall.
Let me just wrap up my portion of this. I mentioned that I taught media literacy, and that is the solution to all of this problem. Is if the individuals in society could truly become media literate. Schools begin K-12 media literacy components through all their curriculum. It's not hard. You start in kindergarten with what little kindergartners, 5 years old, can understand about cartoons, and then you take it all the way through high school. Point being, learn how to use the media. Don't let the media use you. And the answer is not to cut yourself off from all media. That's what all people think when I'm talking. No. The answer is to increase your wise use of media. In other words, don't just read the New York Times. Read the Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and get more information, because the truth, to quote X-Files, the truth is out there. It's up to us to figure it out. Because until we figure out that we are going to know as much as we can get, and we will use our critical thinking skills to parse all the information, we are at the mercy of the media, of the politicians who use the media, of the commerce that uses the media. We are pawns, folks. We are pawns.
And so I want to use this time to allow our panel to share their final thoughts. One thing I kind of wanted to end this discussion on was, do you think there's a future, what is the future for journalism? And is there a future for local journalism? Brief remarks.
Oh, local journalism is the future. That's we're gonna come back to it. Local journalism is the future. Okay, just like with the fragmentation of, let's think of something like online shopping, right? So e-commerce is going to be the death of all brick and mortar storefronts, right? Well, that didn't happen, but what happened was a lot of these anchor stores shut down, these these generalists shut down, and you find niche stores that have something very particular, very refined, very, the highest quality, and that's what's available, and that's what people are seeking. They will seek out and they'll pay the premium, and that's I believe where we're going with journalism.
I think journalism has to survive if we are to survive as a culture, and I don't want to be terribly down about this, but the fact of the matter is that we need to be better informed. We need to realize that not everybody who tells us something we don't want to know is hating on us. That we need a broad scope of knowledge if we are going to be a functioning member of society and a functioning society. Journalists are important, trained journalists.
So I give, like I said, I've given these talks all over, I've been in Grand Rapids and here, I want to give you a little hope as well, that I hear really interesting questions from students all over. They do care very much about that. We just have to create media literacy opportunities, these kind of forums, do what you can to get people asking these kinds of questions. And in terms of, thinking about reading from vast perspectives, use social media in that way. Follow a newspaper website that you wouldn't normally. Subscribe to allsides.com. You can follow them on social media, and they'll give you 3 sides to every story. Those kinds of things can help you at least understand someone who's walking in a different set of shoes than you are.
I think a couple things. One, just by being here today, hopefully you've learned a little bit more, and we'll take that forward into civil conversation, whether it's around the dinner table with a friend or relative who doesn't agree with you on something, or even more thoughtfully posting on social media. We didn't really get into that, but there's nice ways to respond and kind of correct people. Sites that fact check, you can share Snopes, PolitiFact, and Red State, Blue State, is that the Wall Street Journal's Red State, Blue State? Yeah, you can see various feeds and compare. Supporting media literacy efforts, if you've got, children, grandchildren, friends, kids, neighbors, whatever it is. This takes all of us, and it's my life, what I do every day. I live it every day, and I know not everyone does, but there's hardly a conversation that comes up where you couldn't work something in, maybe something you heard today, or other resources that you saw that just keep it going. And then, this is super self-serving, but support your local media. Public media rely on grants and underwriting and individual donations. If you're one of those donors, thank you very much. I always want to say that and point out, because we really can't do it without the individuals. But we don't take that for granted. More and more media organizations are creating audience engagement opportunities, not just through social media, but events in the community, coming to panels like this today. We're taping one Detroit, mostly on site. If you want to see where those are, come to a taping, email me, I'll let you know. There's a lot of different ways that media are doing their jobs in very different ways as well. And while reporting is at the heart of it, we're only ever as good as our sources. And if it's Twitter, that's not as good as being out in the community and hearing from people individually. So thank you all so much for being here today.
Be responsible for your own information.
Yeah.
Be responsible for your own information. Don't expect somebody else to do it for you. Okay? NAMLE, N-A-M-L-E, National Association of Media Literacy Education. NAMLE, anybody can join it. They've got a nice website. Pay attention, because media literacy is the answer.
And our moderator.
I want to thank you all for coming out on this cold day. I hope you found this session to be very informative and helpful. And we thank you for continuing to support the activities here at the Detroit Center. On February 21st, from 6:30 or from 6 to 8 p.m. And in our room, we're going to be hosting our history, our Eye on Detroit for Black History Month, the plight of the Black academic. We're going to be discussing the challenges and issues of being a member of the university faculty as an African American in today's society, and how they, deal with student protests and different things of that nature, and their own challenges. challenges of being on faculty. And then on March 21st, we're doing an Eye on Detroit, and we're going into, the title is What's in a Brand. We're going to be talking about how to build a brand, personal, business, nonprofit, discussing those different factors. And we hope you can come out then as well. And thank you all for your time.